Hello everyone, I'm Rhonda of Goddess Garage. This is my second attempt at this video. Someone called me, so I'm on airplane mode now, so no more interruptions, which is great. Okay, so I'm here to talk to you about fairy tales, one of my favorite subjects. And in particular, I'm talking about Rumpelstiltskin and the dark images within and secrets and things we weren't told in what we think is the original version. So, if you remember, Rumpelstiltskin is a strange little man who comes to a girl in a dire time and creates magic for her. If you've heard Rumpelstiltskin, and I know as a kid when I heard it, I felt there was something sort of deeper and darker hiding behind who Rumpelstiltskin was. It's not just a strange little man, and it's not just a girl spinning straw into gold. But it is something darker, something older, and far more powerful. This is a 4,000-year-old fairy tale. It was never meant as a children's story. The themes within this story are secret names, bargains with supernatural beings, spinning, fate, and the power of words. And we're going to talk about all of them. And one of the main themes as well is gold. Today we're stepping beyond the fairy tale and into the shadows of its real origins. We've been told it's a simple fairy tale. Like I said, it's a strange little man, a foolish and greedy king, a lying father, and a girl forced to spin straw into gold. The true meaning is much darker, and many cultures have a version of this story. There are symbols hidden inside this tale, and this tale is far older than we think. And it's really focused around the name Rumpelstiltskin. Ancient Egyptians believed names contained magical force, and many Egyptians had a secret name that nobody knew, that was often buried with them because it would help them sort of navigate the afterlife. The Hebrews believed names revealed the essence of being. They often never say God's true name in the Torah. I know in my Mohawk heritage, you don't receive your real name until you've grown up a little bit. Often in the toddler stage, I got it as a young teenager. But the reason they delay the naming is because they want to know who you are so that your name fits you. Now, of course, I'm half Irish, half Indian. I call myself an Irish Indian. Normally it's Indigenous or First Nations. Anyways, my mother named me later because our status wasn't reinstated until later for whatever reason. Anyways, often Native children get nicknames and then they get their name. So when I was born, Mom gave me a name because you need something for the birth certificate. So that's why I have Rhonda. And then my nickname is Rhonda Bear because I'm very bear-like. And my Mohawk name, I can't pronounce it in Mohawk, but I know the meaning of it is brilliant light. Just checking that one because it looks like it's being very busy. And in many European folk traditions, the stories that are circulating at that time, they taught that fairy spirits and demons could be controlled by their true names. And even the church often during exorcisms ask for the demon's real name so they can cast it out and have control and send it back to hell, so to speak. So the version most people know comes from the Brothers Grimm and published in 1812. Now, the Brothers Grimm actually didn't start out to do fairy tale books. They started out wanting to do a dictionary of the Germanic languages. They felt that the Germanic languages were going to be lost in some way, so they wanted to record them. I think they got up to about the M's before the last brother died. But in that job of, collecting words of the Germanic languages for their dictionary, they also ended up gathering folk tales and fairy tales and folklore and all that good stuff. And so they recorded that as well because they felt that had a place. Now, their 1812 version that they put out is considered one of the modern day versions of fairy tales. They put a lot of fairy tales in there, and they did do a second edition in 1815, I believe it was. And they cut a lot of the fairy tales that are in the original 1812, and they sanitized them a little bit as well. That's a whole other video, I guess. But the 1812 version is what I'm referring to today. But like many of their stories, they actually didn't create any of these stories. They only collected them, which is fine. But funnily enough, a lot of their folk tales that they collected there's versions of them all over the world. And their 1812 version is definitely a lot darker than the 1815 version. 1815 version is still dark, but not as dark. So from whispers, from folklore, from stories passed down in a time when fairy tales weren't meant to comfort children. Fairy tales that the bards would tell you or sing about, that Grandma would talk about at the hearthside, they were meant to warn. At its core, Rumpelstiltskin is a story about desperation and dangerous promises. So in the story of Rumpelstiltskin, there's many, many layers of symbols. One of the first ones is Rumpelstiltskin hears the girl crying and wants to make her happy, get rid of her tears. She's in that moment of, oh my God, I will give anything. So Rumpelstiltskin comes for 3 nights, and 3 is a very commonly used number in fairy tales. 3 wishes, 3 little pigs, on and on it goes. There's often 3s that happen. I think even in one of the original Cinderellas, she goes to the ball 3 nights in a row because back then they often didn't just do 1 night of a ball. So anyways, he comes for 3 nights. And on the first night, she gives him her ring, valuable. And he spins the straw into gold. On the second night, there's even more straw that the king has given to the girl and said, spin it into gold, or else I kill you or kill her father. I can't remember. He was going to kill somebody. Maybe both. Who knows? So he comes on the second night, and she gives him her necklace. Very valuable. On the third night he comes, and there's even more straw than the other 2 nights combined. And she's at her wit's end, like how is even Rumpelstiltskin going to do this? Especially since she realizes she has nothing left to give. There's a price for his work. So he suggests to her, give me your firstborn child once this is done. So she makes the promise that she will give him her firstborn child. And the story is really about what humans are willing to sacrifice when they're feeling trapped. It's about desperation and promises made in fear. So it's a warning of, Don't make rash decisions when you're not centered, when you're not calm. It's basically saying don't react, respond instead. So you've probably heard that. So this is that kind of fairy tale that's telling you to do that, because it's not about spinning straw into gold. Another layer on this story is the spinning wheel, which also shows up in many fairy tales. The best known one is probably Sleeping Beauty. And spinning was across cultures, making the clothes, making the blankets, making the towels, whatever else we needed. So spinning was women's work across all cultures. In the Greek mythology, they have the Greek fates, 3 women, again, 3, right? Spinning the threads of humankind. And the first one held the ball, the second one pulled the length of that human, and the third one snipped when your death was supposed to happen. Norse mythology speaks of women as well, who weave the futures of men and kingdoms. So you had to revere these women because they were in control of, what's going to happen, how hard a struggle is it going to be, how long it's going to be for the kingdom to last, all that kind of stuff. And like I said, spinning appears many times in fairy tales. Like I said, Sleeping Beauty is probably the most popular one, when the king gets rid of all the spinning wheels because he doesn't want his daughter to prick her finger and fall asleep with an altered curse. So that's more on the Sleeping Beauty one. So there's also the 3 Ants, it's called, and it's a Scottish fairy tale. There's the Golden Spinning Wheel. It's a Czechoslovakian fairy tale. So a lot of the spinning wheels in these other fairy tales are gold. So we're going to talk about that. They're golden spinning wheels that have magical qualities to be able to spin magical things. So there's the 3 spinners, the spindle and the shuttle and the needle, and the Nixie of Mill Pond, all in the 1812. I'm not sure if they're in the 1815 version of the Brothers Grimm's collection of fairy tales. So it's spinning wheel with a 4,000-year-old secret. Truly what this is talking about is taking straw and putting it into gold, which is alchemy. And gold is more than wealth. It actually represents the divine, and it represents purity. So the king, yes, he wanted his riches, he was greedy, but it's a status thing as well. To serve on silver is great, but to serve on gold is even better. It represented the reshaping of the mundane into the divine. So if you often look at religious icons, pictures of saints, they have a golden halo over their head. And many times when, they made statues or idols of some kind, they would put golden crowns on them or halos, and they would literally be made of gold because that represented their divinity and their purity, and their god or goddess like energy. So it represented the mundane into the divine. In later centuries, it was known as alchemy. So when, like during the medieval times and beyond, when you talked about alchemy, everyone assumed you were taking ingredients, elements, whatever it might be, putting them together and hopefully transforming them into gold. They never did that, but it was a nice pipe dream. So what Rumpelstiltskin is really doing is he's performing cosmic work. Because oftentimes when we talk about the universe, humankind, all this stuff, we talk about an invisible web that we're all connected to, like a spider's web. And when we lift ourselves up, we lift others. When we lift others, we lift ourselves. And we're all connected to each other. So it's best to love as opposed to hate. That's why I often say, find more things to love than to hate. I sort of copied that off of, I've heard a few judges, and I know Judge Judy has said it, because that's my secret little indulgence that I do. I love court shows. But she often will tell divorced parents, love your children more than you hate each other. So that's kind of my inspiration for find more things to love than to hate, because we can bitch and moan and find misery in lots of things. But if we find things that we love, it changes us, it transforms us. So what he's performing is cosmic work. But magic, especially in the fairy tales, often has a price and has something that must be sacrificed. And this is very spiritual kind of work, because when we grow spiritually, we are often being asked to sacrifice something or let go of something. And often it's, negativity or negative based kind of stuff, not just negativity, but maybe it's a belief we had about ourselves. Oh, I just can't do this because, or I'm doing this, but, it's releasing those buts and can'ts and whatnot. And when we change and when we grow spiritually and we realize we have knowledge or a gift, it comes with the price of responsibility. Meaning we can't just sit back and go, oh, I don't know, I'm not sure, I can't do this, I'm unable to do that. No, we suddenly are asked to step up, right? And a lot of us don't want to do that. We're very comfortable wallowing down low. So that's the magic of growing, as well as the greater responsibility that we now have. At the dawn of the Bronze Age, for instance, so there's different ages that humankind has gone through. And at the dawn of the Bronze Age, we mixed copper and tin, which made bronze, which was stronger than what we had known. And then it goes up from there. Like there's the Iron Age, which is very strong, and blah, blah, blah. But we learned how to mix them together. But like Prometheus, who introduced humankind to fire and thus got punished for it, a godlike supernatural being introduced us to blacksmithing or forging and how to get the fire so hot that was given to us by Prometheus in Greek mythology. I know in the book of Enoch, they are referred to as the Watchers of the towers, basically. So the East Tower, the West Tower, the Watchers, and they are the ones that gave humankind the knowledge of forging and blacksmithing and how to put different elements into the fire and create an even better, stronger element. Now, unfortunately, a lot of this forging stuff did not go into not wooden spoons, obviously, but kitchen items like ladles and flippers and things like that. They often went to the creation of weapons. So just putting that out there. Let me just get okay, so like I said, Rumpelstiltskin is a story of a father who lies for personal gain, who is scared and is threatened with death if he didn't come up with something good. The young woman in the story, who is the daughter of the lying father, is trapped by that lie. Thanks, Dad. And in her darkest moment, something answers. Now, it's interesting how fathers don't really play big roles in fairy tales. They're often a side comment. They're screwing something up, or they're, just non-existent almost. They come in once in a while, like the male character. He's not a father necessarily, but that comes into Little Red Riding Hood and that sort of thing. And the Prince Charming, they don't even have names. Prince Charming, the woodcutter, the father. It's not like, oh, Snow White and, Cinderella and all these kind of things. So the fathers barely have a part in any story, and they barely have a name. But mothers were at the beginning very revered, as well as goddess figures were found in very early archaeological digs that obviously the first sort of worshipings happened around goddess type figures. Anyways, I digress. That's a whole other thing. But here's where it gets interesting when something answers. Rumpelstiltskin doesn't just help her out of the goodness of his heart. He makes a deal. He comes in and says, "What will you give me?" for the price of his magic. He's happy to help, but there's a price. In ancient folklore, deals were never that simple. Deals were considered bindings, contracts. There's many binding spells you can do. Archangel Raphael is the demon binder. So bindings are very important. And it's through a name that you can bind, or through binding that you can create magic. Contracts of energy, bindings of fate, and often of the soul. Have we all watched the Simpson episode where Bart sells his soul? Never a good thing. He spins the straw into gold for her, thus placating the king, keeping her from death, keeping her father from death. But what is he really doing? What is he really transforming? Something worthless into something powerful. Alchemy. And what does he ask for in return? Not money, not jewels, although he does accept them the first 2 nights. He accepts not money, jewels, but eventually he wants her firstborn child. In the ancient world, the sacrificing of the firstborn was a theme throughout. There's many stories that talk about sacrificing. And unfortunately, when famines hit, and they hit hard in the ancient world, children were sacrificed. We all know the story of Hansel and Gretel. The father and stepmother take the children out. The father's a woodcutter, and they take them out into the woods, and they leave them there because there's a huge famine. They don't have enough to feed all of them. So they can feed themselves, but not their children, so they sacrifice their children. And there's stories throughout the world of Asian folktales, and also actual stories of especially girls, baby girls, being sacrificed because they weren't as valuable as a son. Now, in this day and age, a lot of that has changed. You know, if we're going hungry, if we maybe don't have enough money to buy all the groceries we need, because groceries are astronomically high these days, we will tend to feed our children first and we'll sacrifice, right? So, you know, that's just saying how things have changed a little bit, right? So, speaking of his name, there is an ancient power in speaking a being's name, like I talked about earlier, you know, the different examples of, you know, how a name can be used. The name in the Testament of Solomon, King Solomon, is the key to unlock the blueprint of the code. So your name is very important because it is your blueprint of your code. And have you ever, you know, met somebody, you know, their name, it's like, oh, that's very fitting. Oh, I wouldn't see you as that. I see you as this name. You know, you kind of make that, you know, sort of split second decision, and you're not really sure why that name for you seems to fit that person better than their actual name. Or, you know, you see that name, it's like, oh yeah, that's a great name. Have you ever met someone named Joy? I have. And she really was full of joy. I loved her aura. And obviously her parents were hippies too, but nevertheless, she really lived up to that name. So the helper's name is always unique. So when a helper comes into a fairy tale, it often has a generic name like fairy godmother, or a very specific name, and unique name. Okay. So ancient beings don't speak. They often sing or chant. So there's a lot more power in singing and chanting. And chanting, especially because you're often repeating, as you are when you sing, because there's the chorus, right, of most songs. And as we've heard in many modern day songs, you know, I feel like sometimes they just come up with one line and they just put that to the beat and just say that line over and over again. I'm like, is there anything else to this song other than that one line? But it really is like, singing or chanting something is very powerful, even more powerful than speaking. Writing and speaking are very powerful in their own right, but singing and chanting it, even more powerful. The world was created by the word. The first line in the Bible is words, and it says, "Let there be light." It is the word that created the light. It is also the word that can create darkness. So be mindful of what you are saying, because you're creating your reality, as I'm sure you've heard before, with your speech. If you say, "I'm stupid," you will be. And the old saying of Henry Ford, if you say you can't, you're right. If you say you can, you're also right. So, know that you can transform. It always comes with a price and a sacrifice. Now, it might be a good sacrifice. Maybe it's like, oh, I've transformed and changed. I can quit smoking. And boom, you quit smoking. Good. That's a good transformation. And most of them in the end are good transformations. Quitting smoking is not easy. It's friggin' hard. And like most people are very addicted. I unfortunately don't carry the addiction gene, so I never got addicted to it. In high school, I smoked, be one of the cool kids, but I never got addicted to it, so thank God for that, right? So anyways, her firstborn child. In older traditions, the firstborn wasn't just a child. In fairy tales or in even biblical scriptures and things like that, the firstborn represents the legacy of that family. It represents power and the continuation of the bloodline of that family. Sometimes, you could have 7 children and only one survives, the birth, the growing up. There was so much that could, like people that grew up back in ancient times went through a lot. And they really were survivors. It's like 5 years old, you're good, you're gonna make it, you're fine. Hopefully a famine or a fever or a plague does not come through, but right now you're doing good. So like I said, it represented the bloodline and the legacy and the continuation of the bloodline and the power of having it continue on. To give that away was to give away a piece of your future and a piece of yourself. And then there is the name. The only way to break the deal of not having to give up her firstborn child is just to discover his true name. So like I said, it's very unique. So it's not John or Paul or Matthew or anything like that. Wonderful names, Gabriel, Joshua. No, it's a very weird name. So Rumpelstiltskin feels he's probably going to win this game, because who's going to come up with that name? He gives her 3 nights, 3 again, to guess his name. So he comes the first night. She's got a scroll of names. She's now out of her prison, out of her dungeon, and she's now getting married to the prince, be part of his kingdom, all that kind of stuff. So she's got scrolls and she's got helpers that are trying to help her come up with a name. He comes, no luck. Nope, none of those are my name. This is not just a clever twist in the story. This is ancient magic. Across cultures and traditions, knowing a being's true name meant you had power over it, and meant you could break its hold. So you could break any contract, any deal, any binding you made with that creature. If you could name it, you could break it. So what we're really looking at is not just a fairy tale, but a story of power, control, and transformation. and the consequences of bargains made in fear. And perhaps a reminder to be very careful what you agree to. When you feel, especially when you feel, you have no other choice. There's always a choice. You're never really forced into something. Again, going back to my court shows is my sort of secret indulgence. There's a lot of people that will, if they're defending themselves or whatever, saying, I didn't have a choice. They made me sign this. And the judge will often say, how big was the gun they were holding to your head when you signed this? And they don't realize they made a contract between two people, and you have to honor that contract. There might be clauses where you can get out of it. You may be able to approach the person and say, hey, I don't want to do this anymore. Can we break this contract or rewrite it in some way? But once you sign the dotted line, you're bound by it. So be very careful. Read what you're signing. Pay attention to what you're promising. Oftentimes, your word is the only thing you have. So if you love uncovering the hidden meanings behind fairy tales, the magic, the shadows, and the truths they carry, please subscribe to Goddess Garage here if you enjoyed this. If you'd like to look at other videos, if you'd like to share them, please like them, subscribe, ring the little fairy bell, as I call it, so that you know when other fairy tales come up or other playlists that you want to listen to. I kind of hopefully have them well organized. And thank you so much for being here. And be careful, not only what you wish for, but be careful what you promise. Have a great day.